Good evening and welcome to Residency Hot Topics. I have a often featured guest, Doug Adams here, world-renowned knowledge base in all things running, and specifically what we're talking about today are the new adaptations in 2D and 3D running, especially with the advent of AI and how to make sense of all that as a clinician. So, Doug, really appreciate you being here. The floor is yours.
No, I appreciate you having me here. Always great to join, and appreciate you all coming out on a post-holiday weekend here. I know that can be busy. We're just getting back from Maine ourselves. So, and Ben, you're in a different time zone, so I appreciate you being on and having us there. So, all right. So, yeah, as Ben introduced, we're going to kind of talk about this like future of running analysis. We had a similar, like a fairly similar talk, but different. I think it was over a year ago. It was kind of called like cheat codes of running analysis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and then go into some other things. But first, disclosures, just letting everyone know. I do have companies that I sell things for, including CEUs and technology. But nothing here is designed to be required for anything we're talking about. Really, this is information, and I'd like feedback. I really enjoy dynamic presentations where people are engaging and in the chat. So maybe you guys actually prove that the chat's working. Throw out where you're coming from, so I see where you're coming from here. If somebody could let me know, who's coming from the farthest, different time zones, things like that. So let's see. I want to make sure I can see that. It looks like Julia's on it there, typing away. So good. Montana. All right, very good. Julia, all right, I'm right in Delaware, so we're not far from each other. Massachusetts, just drove through there. Very good. Kansas, all right, very good. All right, so while you're putting those in there, I'll let you know a little bit about me if you haven't heard me talk before. I am a running nerd, PT by trade, and I get to spend a lot of time just doing exactly what I love to do, working with runners. So I started Run DNA back in 2016, and in 2018, I started Omega Project PT, which is a cash-based physical therapy clinic that is kind of the flagship and proof of concept for Run DNA. But I've been grateful and lucky enough to really spend a lot of my career working with a lot of professional runners, team PT for an Adidas team for several years, a lot of work with the Department of Defense, and just really have dedicated my life to working with all sorts of runners from first timers to literally first in the world. So looking to bring that knowledge to you guys and learn from you guys as well. Um, we started the company actually as an education company back in 2016. And we had this mission 100 happy, healthy, and letting people live to be 100 years old and happy and healthy when they get there and take the most out of running. And I started in research and learning a bit about what are some common things that we saw in runners that were contributing to injuries or loss of performance. And we started teaching a bunch of courses that way. And then people started asking us for more resources and tools. And I was no longer in research. So I really wanted to get access to it. The equipment was way too expensive. So we built our own equipment meant for the clinician in mind. And then we've had an evolution since then where we keep building technology and tools. But now in this AI era, we've had a decade and tens of thousands of 3D files that have really helped us to start to create the next generation of gait analysis technology, which I'm going to talk to you here and more from the lens of how you can learn from it and how you can apply it in your own setting versus just what we did there. So if you did not go to the last talk last year, just a quick refresher on this stuff, and I would recommend Ben, I don't know if there's a database of the old ones here, but we can get you access to some of this stuff as well. But basically, Run DNA teaches a systematic approach of how to analyze runners and look at them from a comprehensive approach. So we have our 5 categories of gait impairments, which is our overstrider, our collapser, our weaver, our bouncer, and our glute amnesiac. And we talk about what defines those, what do those really mean, and how you're able to use that information to inform clinical decisions. But gait isn't the only thing. We also have to look at mobility, movement capabilities. So we have our runner readiness assessment, we have our loading levels, we have all these things with an idea of how do we individualize and prioritize for the runner. And we also talked last time a bit about comparing different technologies. And at that time, we were really just comparing 2D and 3D. But there's been an evolution in a lot of things, and we want to talk about that. And that's really the objective for tonight, is talk about what are these AI tools that are available? How can you choose which ones can help you and your clients the most? When you still really need to rely on things like 3D, and what are the variables that are going to help you determine when 2D is good enough versus 3D, and translating that all into clear, actionable treatment strategies. I think we did a lot of that in the talk last year, and we do have even free courses on our website that you can do and get a taste of some of that stuff as well. So I really want to start by just level setting some of the gait tools that are available. This is obviously not everything, but expanding on the talk from last year, we really look at this and when are we using each tool? Our 2D and visual tool, I think there's a place for all of these, right? It's not just the one that we're trying to do. We're really looking for how we can utilize these at each point in our clinical care. So 2D is, hey, you want some quick feedback? I still do this once in a while. I just want to show, hey, look, here's what you're doing. Look, see this? Don't do that, right? Then this is also something that you can utilize outside, and it's pretty much low to no cost. I am not a proponent of drawing lines on figures. It takes a long time. It is not very reliable or accurate, and I think it is not always worth the squeeze. But I think it's a great way to do visual feedback, especially really for sagittal plane. Frontal and transverse are obviously challenging for 2D with that. Now, on the flip side of that, we've got the 3D, right? I'm going to skip over the middle one for a second. And this is, you've got a complicated case, an injury, you need immediate feedback, and maybe you're also looking to make money with that. That is really marker-based 3D is the gold standard, that is still really accessible, and can be part of that. But in between that now, we have these computer visions, which are really what people are calling AI for gait analysis. And it has a lot of the advantages of 2D, plus you're getting much more objectivity. And the way I look at this is it's really a good screening tool that's going to give you some quick insight, some details, some numbers that can be really helpful to guide you and get you along the lines of that personal insight. So I think these exist along a spectrum, and I really think that there's a time and place for each of these in a clinical practice, depending on what you're looking to do here. And of note, I think that just to go without saying, this isn't just for runners. If you are looking to work with athletes, this is a critical aspect of your care. And as these technologies are becoming more and more readily accessible, we really have to start understanding which ones we should be using. And then this later part of the talk, we're going to say, how do you actually use this information? Because that's the critical part of all this. Assessing is only one aspect. So AI is here, right? And that's what we need to talk about a little bit more. On your screen, you can see this is our version of AI that we've created. And I have been blown away, and it is very, very valuable when done correctly. It makes accessible data for gait, it gives actionable insights, and it can be very widely accessible. Big if here, if it's accurate. And this last part of this slide is really kind of what led us down a journey ourselves here. About 2 years ago, we started saying, all right, hey, these tools are available. Let's start using them. And we started looking at what's available. And you can see on the right, this was kind of some models that we took. And these were even directly from some websites and things like that. These are what people were saying was good. I mean, I just looked at the amount of just movement on the body and how the model was just bouncing around all over and said, that is just not reliable data for that. So as you're evaluating these ones, be aware that many of these models lack accuracy. I'm going to tell you why so that you know what to look for. But if you're looking at something and you're evaluating a tool and testing it out, take a simple look, right? Like say, okay, hey, how much is that bouncing up and down? How much am I seeing that the knee moved inward, but that is really not tracking it very smoothly? And when you do see it a lot smoother, that can be really helpful to say, all right, I seeing that this information is really accurate with that. So that's what kind of led us on our own journey of saying, well, we've got all this data. Like, I think we can make a better model. And the reason that is, here's just another one, Sagil. You can see where the model even just goes off of the person at times, and it's not even on the image anymore. It just jumps away from them. So there's a lot more of these 2D AI ones coming out, and you have to really make sure that you're looking at accuracy as you're doing it. And the reason that these are coming out quickly is there's a open source model that a lot of companies are using to say that they're offering motion analysis or markerless 2D. They'll call it a bunch of different things. And they're using something called Google Media Pipe. And there's some other ones as well, but that's the main one that people are using. And those models were trained. And when I say trained, what they do is they take a bunch of example images and try to show it what true means and what accurate is. Those models were trained to tell if something's human or not. And I always joke around that they're kind of garbage because they were literally trained on that. They're like those models. The training included tens of thousands of toilets. We looked at they'll say like, oh, Google Media Pipe was trained on 1,000 or 1,000,000 images. Well, 10,000 of those images were toilets because it was trying to make sure that it didn't think that one toilet, this was its shoulder and its head and its hips, and it would look like a person sitting down. So those models aren't meant for biomechanical accuracy. They are meant and designed to be able to say, this is a human or not. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that are using that model to try to say this is biomechanics. So just be wary of that and make sure that you're assessing those if you're using those tools. So when we were developing ours, we kind of had a lot of fun of doing simultaneous 2D and 3D captures. And I want to show you a case study just showing you that this data really can be accurate, but you got to make sure you're testing it out. So we had this runner come in with complaints of right hip pain, and physical therapist, high level runner, doing ultra marathons and averaging in the like high 6s, low 7s for ultras. So a very competitive, very high level ultra runner. And overall, you would look at it and we have like a scoring system, and the score was pretty high, like a 92%. But what we saw was some pelvic drop. And we were looking at some of the stuff and we said, well, what are we really going to do? So we used the 2D and simultaneously collected the 3D to say, are we getting the same story or are we doing the same thing? And then we charted everything after the fact. And we said, okay, when we're looking at this, and I'm not going to go in details with charts, but this is the 2D is the solid line and the 3D is the dotted line. And we're looking to see, okay, what is the story? Are we getting the same results here? So the knee, great, we're doing pretty well. Sagittal plane, hip, really looking good here. Ankle, there was a little discrepancy because initial contact times were a little bit different on it. And we were actually seeing sometimes the 2D was getting even a little closer if you have a high enough frame rate. So there was a little difference in some of the ankle plantar flexion and dorsal flexion, but overall really telling the same story. We looked at shin angles, really good. We looked at some of the stuff, and I left the study off. Hip adduction also looked really good, and pelvic drop was not as strong, but pretty good as well. But then we looked at the reliability, and we started to look at this here and see, hey, consistently it's showing pretty similar readings throughout. So we're really happy with some of the accuracy of it. And when we used it, we were able to zone in and say, all right, well, what are we going to do for this runner? PT, tried a bunch of things, did a bunch of different mobility work and strength work, but not really seeing a lot of changes. This person had actually taken a bunch of our courses, tried to fix some things, and wasn't really noticing a difference. So we were able to do some cueing, and we brought the contralateral pelvic down fairly, like only by a degree, but noticeable enough that it made a difference. And we saw that some of the other numbers, like hip internal rotation and adduction, came down as well. So we reduced some of the collapsing. And the fun thing about this was, we did the gait analysis. He was like, "Yeah, I do feel better with this," but there's a little bias there. He's coming in for a gait analysis, and we had just talked, and he wants to say that it's improving. So he gave me a call about 3 days later, and he's like, I have been feeling great. I haven't been able to run on the track in almost, I think it was almost a year, like 9 to 12 months. And with the new cue, with this run long cue, which I'll explain a little bit later, we were really able to see a pretty significant improvement where he's like pain free, no issues, where before he couldn't even get 2 sets of 400 meters, one lap around before we started to really have some issues with it. So I think it's really interesting to see that we were able to get this, and we saw a similar story with AI and 2D, with AI, 2D, and 3D. And we were able to see, some differences, right? Just being honest that there are going to be some differences between the two. But we saw it was 9 degrees higher for contralateral pelvic drop on the right. With 3D, it was 4. We're with hip adduction, it was 2 degrees higher on the right, 3 degrees higher on the left. But we got to the same place, we got to the same story of this person's having collapsing at the pelvis, and we were able to really give them a cue. So it can be used in those situations. But we have to be careful, and I do want to address that there's other technologies out there too that aren't just AI related. And I think one of the things we had a conversation today. We do monthly office hours with our Helix 3D users, our 3D clinics out there. And somebody was asking me about a specific running analysis device. And, I gave them the kind of what I tell a lot of people is be careful what you're assessing versus guessing with, right? And make sure you are really, another way to say this is make sure you understand what is being analyzed versus estimated. So there's a lot of more popularity in some of these inertial measurement units, and those are really assessing versus truly analyzing things. And what the literature shows is that if you're looking at something large magnitude, like a loading rate or things like that, and you're going to notice bigger changes side to side, there might be some utility in that. If you are looking for more finite things and understanding what the cause of some of those bigger changes are, then you need to look further. And inertial measurement units aren't going to be able to really show you exactly where it's coming from or why things are happening or what you can do about it. It's going to more so kind of show you what's going on. And one of our users had done 100 analysis. She said, I just did 100, and she had been tracking it, and she had used this other device versus ours, and she's like, it wasn't given the utility. It was kind of all over the place, and it wasn't nearly as accurate. So just be careful when you're looking at these other things. They can look interesting and kind of give you some great displays and graphs, but if you're getting not great information, it's not as useful as you would think. And then there's other more expensive things too, like force plate treadmills and things that you can use there. And we've kind of started to see a shift away from understanding that forces may not necessarily be the thing that are the end all be all as much as how people organize those. So you don't need to spend your money on expensive treadmills or force plates that are really looking at some of that stuff. And you also want to be very accurate about making sure that what you're analyzing transfers over to the specific activity that you're looking at. We do a lot of work with the Marines, and they work behind some of these studies, but I know force plates are very popular and they have their utility for certain things, but they have to stay in their lane a little bit for other things here. And we were really able to see that the force plates aren't really predictive of who's injured and who's not. And I argue it's the same thing as the IMUs, is that if it's not telling you why somebody is having increased forces or changes in how their loading rates happen, is it really that valuable? or is it something that's going to maybe you can track and look at over time, but it's not necessarily going to help you get to the root of the cause there. Those are just some other things I want to make sure we talk about some of that stuff too. If you'd like to see an example, we measure 38 variables. So if you're just curious about the types of things that you can measure with this, you can check out a full report here. Just take out your phone and look at this QR code, and you can look at some of those things and check that out as well. So that's one thing just to keep an eye on, and see what kind of measurements are available. Now, when you're picking this for your own clinic, you really want to make sure you're taking into consideration all the factors, right? So there's clinical considerations, right? Are you really looking to dive into the gait? Do you feel like that is a big part of your practice? How are you going to use the data? What are some of the operational considerations, right? Is your clinic set up to do cash pay services, or are you able to charge through insurance where you're doing that? What's the cost of equipment? What are your additional considerations? Like, how interested are you in exploring gait? And part of this talk is really letting you know that data is going to be much more prevalent. And I think what we're going to see, and I'll explain this a little bit more later, we're going to see that runners are going to start coming to clinicians and saying, I got a gait analysis. Help me interpret it. Help me do something with it. And we, as the provider, really need to be able to say, I know what this data is, and it's really helpful, and I'm able to do something specific about it. Because the findings and the gait analysis and technology itself isn't the answer. It's the fork in the road. Say, okay, I saw increased pelvic drop. I saw a change in tibial inclination angle. I saw a change in foot inclination. Now, here's what I want to do about it. And that's what I want to kind of switch gears to now and impress upon you that if you're not comfortable with this, and if you're not very familiar with it, it's time to start getting comfortable with it, because runners, I've seen a shift in my career. Runners are looking for gait analysis now, and runners are getting gait analysis, and they're getting results, and they're using wearables and IMUs and some of these other things, and they have data, and they're looking for you to be able to interpret it. And if you just disregard what they're telling you, you lose credibility in their mind, and you're not doing everything that you can to really help that person out. So, all right, regardless of tools, if you can put this in the chat and get a little conversation going here, I'd like to know, you can just put yes or no if you want. And if you want to explain why or why not, I'd love to see that too. But are you using gait retraining as a part of your clinical practice? So I'll give you guys a second to maybe put that in there. And I'd love to know, is this something you're doing? You can say yes or no. It might be, I don't see a lot of runners, so I don't do it that often. But if I'm seeing a runner, then I do it. And that, I would say that's a yes. I would hope if you're seeing athletes as well, and athletes that run, you're looking at that too, and using that. But I'd be curious if the people on here wouldn't mind just a little group participation here. Who is using it, who's not. Good. So Andrea's saying that she's using it running and walking retraining as well. Great. I think that's a really good measurement as well too here, that walking is a huge part of this. I got a little slide on that later, just a little shout out to walking gait as well. But that is good to see. Let's see if somebody else get a little extra participation here. And I'll give you guys just another second to kind of type up an answer, and you can simply put yes or no if you like, if you don't want to explain any more there. But good just to see what people are using and doing there. All right, while people are filling that out, and go ahead, I'm going to keep going here just to keep us on time. But gait retraining, I think, was under a lot more scrutiny a while back, and I think we've gotten to the point where we can say yes, it does work, and it's not just for patellofemoral pain syndrome, because I think that's where the most are seeing it, and that's where a lot of literature is. And I will say there's a lack of broad application for it, and I would love to be seeing people doing this with varying types. But I think the problem I have with the current existing literature, and shame on me for not contributing more to it, is that we lack specificity. And a lot of the papers are one size fits all. So everyone gets cadence, everyone gets visual feedback or haptic feedback, or everyone gets a specific cue or a specific gait retraining modality. And I think that that is not what we would do clinically. So why are we doing that in research? We would tailor this to the individual person. So that's what our research should really be looking at. And that's how we've designed what we do is here's a systematic approach that helps you decide which cue is there. And we honestly did this and we still have to publish this. So this is unpublished data. But we did a study with University of Delaware cross country, women's cross country team, and they showed a significant improvement in their running biomechanics. And not only that, but it led to multiple PRs and a significant reduction in injury rate compared to the group that did not do the gait retraining. So we still have to publish that. Didn't get accepted for CSM, unfortunately, but there is a lot in there, and the individualization does really work, and we should be looking at more literature looking at that. Good. So we got Erica and Andrea. Good, some comments. So Erica is doing the gait retraining, not with many runners, mostly cord athletes and walking retraining. Good. Erica and Andrea, if you don't mind sharing, what tools are you using here? Yes, and Andrea, couldn't agree more. I've heard the adage that we can give people mobility and strength, but if we don't also retrain the skill, their movement patterns don't change. And I've got a good analogy for that later too. But I typically say like mobility and stability don't equal ability, right? We need to be looking at the movement patterns and how they all put that together. That's really important too. So now the other thing with gait retraining though, and I think some people can be intimidated by gait retraining, but an important thing to remember is that a little bit goes a long way. And by no means are we trying to make people perfect runners, if such a thing even exists. We see, this is a good example, and I quote this article a good bit because they show that a 10% reduction in the stress of each step will allow a runner to go twice as far before they would start to get breaking down with the body. And that's really helpful information to tell runners because that means I'll tell a story. I went to a gait event night. We had 30 runners show up at a group run, and we brought the Run DNA van out, and we're doing some gait analysis. And 22 of the 30 people did it, and 8 people chose not to do the gait analysis. So I talked to a couple of people that didn't do the gait analysis. I said, why didn't you do it? Well, it was free. What were you thinking? Just kind of joking around with them. And they were like, I already know I'm a bad runner. And I was like, so why didn't you, find out how to fix it? And they're like, I'll never be that perfect runner. I'll never look like those pros. I've tried some things that I found online and I just can't do it. I said, well, you don't have to be perfect. And I told them this article and quoted it in a way that related to them. And they were like, oh, really? And 3 of them wound up doing. They're like, oh. So a lot of times people are just curious they're not curious because they don't think that there's anything that they can do with it. And so part of what we do when we're working with our athletes should also be to educate them that I'm not trying to make you a perfect runner. I'm just picking the low-hanging fruit. And if I do, you're going to run further and faster and less likely to be injured. So how's that sound? And most of the time people are like, that sounds great. Let's do it. So this is another analogy to Andrew's point there about skill training versus just resolving impairments. So this slide shows on the far left here, we've got what the normal movement pattern is. This is without the presence of pain. And I would argue you could also say where we say pain, you could say a lack of ability, right? So that could be reduced strength or motor coordination, those types of things there. So then when we see this acutely, the river, which is just a straight line here when we start with normal, the river starts to bend around that pain or around that dysfunction to avoid it. And our body is pretty good, and it doesn't give us a memo and say, hey, we changed your movement pattern. You just know, all right, I ran, and this is what I did. And a lot of times our athletes aren't getting feedback about that, which is where gait and analysis really comes in and making sure we're checking it consistently. What happens is this pain or this dysfunction persists, and now, like a river being diverted, it wears a new path down. So even when that pain or that dysfunction is gone, we are now seeing that altered movement pattern persist. And that's where we really need to address some of that. So the way we do that is with gait retraining. So we introduce some other stimulus that helps to push it back the other way. That might be a cue, a drill, something like that, where we might see some partial or complete reversion back to a more optimal motor performance there, movement pattern. And then we gradually fade away that feedback as they get more and more skilled with the movement pattern. And eventually we get them to move into a motor learning state, which is where they no longer even have to think about it. Because that's the other thing a lot of people talk about is when they do gait retraining, they're worried like, running is hard enough. I don't want to be thinking about what I'm doing all the time. And when you do gait retraining correctly, you are no longer having the person think about it every run. Yes, I do think people should do a run practice once a week, just like an NBA player is going to practice free throws, or most athletes practice some of the fundamentals. We should practice our form, but when they're running, if they've truly learned the skill and the activity, they'll be able to do it unconsciously without having to think about it. And it actually becomes more efficient when they do that. It just takes a little effort to get there. So gait retraining is really important. And as we're now going back to the point earlier that as data is becoming more prevalent, we need to know what to do with it. And you have to ask yourself, do you feel confident and ready to take information that's going to be available to you and to use that to create a specific program and plan for the person that's in front of you? So here's a couple examples of what that looks like and what that means. So we mentioned our collapsing mechanics earlier, and let's relate that to a specific injury, medial tibial stress syndrome. And a lot of people think about that as being related to arch and pronation. And people often think that prolonged or excessive pronation is actually a contributing factor to medial tibial stress syndrome. But what more recent literature actually shows is that it's more of a delayed resupination, and that they're not necessarily going into further or faster pronation, but they're not resupinating as quickly. So what happens there is they have a less rigid foot, and they're seeing a higher peak muscle activity. I got an error on the slide. I'll have to fix that. But we're seeing higher peak muscle activity at the soleus, which is what attaches right to the periosteum, contributing to medial tibial stress syndrome. So it puts traction on that periosteum, and it causes torsional loading and contributes to that. So when you're thinking about that, what are you going to do for that person? Like, how are you going to intervene? And how are you going to design a specific program? What exercises are you going to do? What cues are you going to do? So here's an example, and this is coming actually from our medial tibial stress syndrome lecture that's coming up on Thursday, a free webinar we're doing for CEUs. I'll give you the link at the end if you want to sign up for that and get some more CEUs and spend more time with me in a July evening here. But one of the ways that you can use this information is say, great, I'm going to do a 4-foot elevated calf raise, and I'm going to really cue people and educate them on maintaining a neutral foot position and make sure they're in the correct position so that they can more adequately do that. And then I'm going to give them some cues of getting the foot off the ground a little faster so that they get into that more resupinated position quicker, and they know what it feels like from the exercise and drill, and then transfer it into the cue. So that's how you have to be able to transfer. A patient comes in, they've got medial tibial stress syndrome. You're noticing that they're a little delayed and they're still a little bit everted at push off or toe off. Then this is how you intervene with that. And that's the level of familiarity and comfort that you need when working with all athletes, especially runners there. So here's another example. Overstriding with somebody that's got tight hip flexors. So if you got somebody with tight hip flexors, that can contribute to an anterior pelvic tilt. That anterior pelvic tilt is going to reduce the glute max activation. The glute max is active right before the foot hits the ground. So if you have reduced activation there, we're going to see that that can contribute to overstriding mechanics, which is linked to a number of different things from knee, hip, back pain, all the way up the chain. So we need to be able to say, all right, how am I going to intervene with this? What am I going to look at here? And how would I cue this person? What cue could I give them? All right, so maybe I'm going to do some mobility work for the hip flexors, but am I going to give them a run long cue? Am I going to give them a tuck and tilt cue? Am I going to give them some feedback and we're going to do some different drills? What would you do for this person to make sure that you are getting specific to the impairment that you're seeing related to their injury? Because this might even show up in other things besides knee and back pain. There was an interesting study showing that for every 5 degrees of anterior pelvic tilt, there's increased length of proximal hamstring by about a centimeter, most at the semimembranosus. So if you're having a athlete, especially, I worked with a series of Major League Baseball players. I had about 5 or 6 guys come in from the same team, and they were all having a lot of hamstring issues. Well, come to find out that some things they were doing in the weight room and kind of a lack of mobility for hip flexors and some of the ways that they were doing things, they were all running in a very anterior pelvic tilt position. And that was putting a lot of stress on it. So we were able, each one needed a little something different, but we were able to find that and get to the central thing. And the next year, a couple guys that had missed, all of them were able to get through the whole season without any of those hamstring issues. So we have to take this data and really understand. And this is, to Andrea's point too about walking, this isn't just with running. And I'd argue that with post-operative, we really need to start looking at the same kind of thing early on in the post-operative standpoint, because we see things that could be contributing to lots of different impairments. But for other diagnosis like plantar fascial type pain, plantar foot pain, we're often seeing that to avoid putting pressure on the origin of the plantar fascia, they'll often land in a more supinated position. And then they go through a 20% higher excursion from initial contact to mid-stance. And then that puts more strain on the plantar fascia itself. So that's why a lot of times people have these long bouts with plantar fascial pain, because the way that they're avoiding it and compensating for it oftentimes contributes to the reason that it persists. So this is really important. If you want that level of detail and you're looking for that, the 3D is probably going to be pretty important for that, because you're not going to get some of these other things with the 2D AI or with visual observation with 2D or just with your eyes. You're going to need a little bit more detail with some of that stuff. And you get the advantage of doing the real-time feedback and getting this to know right away what they're doing with it. So you can ask this. This can be a rhetorical question if you don't want to answer it here. But I would ask you, if I right now had you choose a cue to modify running form based on a specific impairment. So the the anterior pelvic tilt, or tibial, the angle of the shin, the angle of the foot, the angle of the knee, limited hip extension. If I gave you that and asked you to create a program for it, would you be able to come up with drills and cues to be able to address that specifically? Are you confident in doing that? And then the varsity status here is, do you have multiple cues for a single impairment? Because everyone's a different type of learner as well. And what might work for one person might look like you have two heads when you tell them to run soft or run like you're running on ice or things like that. So I think that is a really critical skill of anybody that wants to master working with athletes. And I would say anybody working in orthopedics. You really have to know, for walking, for running, exactly how to map a deficit, a gait impairment, to a specific drill, specific cue that makes that happen. And, that's where we see things like run long. We talked about that with the case earlier here, of what to do. And this run long cue has been really good for collapsers. This is one that I admittedly struggled for years working with people with pelvic drop. I just could not get it to change. And I felt like my own 3D system was just slapping me in the face every time I would do this cue. I'm like, how did that do? And then it would be the same for pelvic drop. And then started using this run long cue and found that that really helps to activate the core and stabilize the pelvis a bit more here. But then have progressed it over time. And I've said, all right, well, that doesn't resonate with everyone, or people struggle with that one of knowing what I'm asking them to do. So came up with other things like a dowel overhead run, where this is getting them to really feel like that elongation, and they press up and they're engaging their core and they really feel the pelvis stabilizing and the core activating that way. So we came up with some other things. And there's some different marching drills that we do. There's some different wall drills that we do where we'll get them to kind of go into a tuck and tilt so that they are able to control the pelvis, keeping the body long. I then even started changing the way that they do the dowel and say, keep this in that posture and make sure that they can lean forward as they do it. And I think it can be really helpful if you come up with these different ones. And this is a lot of what we teach in our level 1 and level 2 certified running gait analyst courses, which is where I put the badges down there, to give you the exact cues of here's what you see, here's what to do. Because that's a critical skill. And that's what we really need to do. And after working with 10,000 plus runners, it looks like my picture is not showing here, but going looking at thousands and thousands of files, I think we're in an era, and I would challenge everybody to say we need to start being able to go from these generic, I'm just looking at foot strike on 2D, or I'm looking at their cadence. We need to get specific. We need to start looking at what are we going to do when we see contralateral pelvic drop off? What are we going to do when tibial inclination is asymmetrical on one side versus the other? I'm just going to refresh this real quick so that the pictures show up. But you guys still see my screen here. I'm just going to refresh this. Okay. And all right, there we go. Still seeing my screen there. So what we need to be able to do is start to say we need to be more specific, because we're talking about specificity, not perfection. I don't always get it right every time I choose a cue. A lot of times it does hit because I've done it so many times with so many people. But if you're looking at it and you're trying to be specific of what's this gait impairment, how could that relate to this person that's coming in with shin pain or hip pain or back pain? When you get that and then you say, well, this person also had really tight hips. Okay, that could be contributing to it too. And if you can weave that story together and match that cue to the impairments that you see, that's really going to help you get the results. But when you do that, you need to make sure that you verify that it worked and that it stayed. And that's where the technology comes in. And that's where I would encourage you, no matter what you're doing, I don't care if it's ours, somebody else's, objectivity is really important, because that's your learning opportunity. That is your chance to say, this cue worked for this person. And then when you do that cue for the next person and it doesn't work, you start to ask yourself, well, why did it work for Susie but not Betty? And you start looking at those and saying, oh, well, Betty had a lot of hip mobility limitations, so she probably wasn't able to do a tuck and tilt cue. Where Susie, she had probably hypermobility, so she had struggled keeping it. Betty had trouble getting it. Looking at that and verifying, and it's not only a great way to learn, but it's a really fun way to treat, because your runners are going to see noticeable improvement, and they're really going to be able to get a significant change, and they've got you to thank for that. And it's really fun. And again, just to really emphasize this point, the data is coming. Your runners are going to start bringing it to you. Are you ready? Right? And it's not just running. We need to look at everything too, right? So when we look at injuries here, form is part of it, strength, mobility, equipment, their training, their well-being, their stress. Like, each runner has their own unique injury profile, and you have to be a detective and be very curious and figure out what that is. But a lot of people are missing this running form part of it, and they're not getting the results that they want. And that's what we really need, which we want to get those results. And as well, like, just giving you guys, and this is what we're looking for. This slide might seem a little intimidating at first, but RunDNA is bringing the 2D technology directly to runners. And we're creating a connected ecosystem with this. And what we want is that app is their always on guide in their pocket. It's going to give them a little form advice, some custom training programs, and help them with some of the day-to-day decisions that can either lead them to success or lead them astray. And then it's going to highlight one of the things we do for our courses is we have a list of providers. And we are connecting our list of providers to the app so that when somebody tells us, hey, I'm starting to have pain, we're going to say, all right, there's somebody 20 miles down the road or 20 minutes down the road from you that is certified and is able to help you with this. Here's a physical therapist. Here's a medical physician who specializes in seeing runners. Here's somebody that does advanced gait analysis and they've got the 3D equipment and they can help you get a little bit more feedback. Or here's a coach that can maybe give you a little bit more customization for your program. But the idea is runners are often needing support and guidance. So when I say that runners are going to be coming to you armed with information, hopefully it's ours, but there's others out there too. But they're going to say, hey, I got this gait analysis and here's what I saw and these numbers are off and what can I do with it? And it gave me a couple cues and drills, but we're not looking to replace the physical therapist, athletic trainer. We are trying to actually feed the right people to them. We want to connect everybody, put them together and make sure that the right clients are finding the right providers that really care about it there. So that's why we're really encouraging people, like, this is coming, everything's happening so fast with AI. So make sure that you are ready to accept these types of clients. So if you would like to try out, it's free for a limited time. You can use the web-based app and you can assess your own running. And all you need is 5 steps from the side and 5 steps from the back. And this can be either running over ground or running on a treadmill. So you can do either one there. And this is a great way to get familiar with it and try it out on your own. We are releasing the mobile app version of this month. Should be ready by the end of the month, maybe August 1st or 2nd, depending on some factors there. But this is the consumer version, the direct-to-runner version, is coming out this month. So after that, that link will not be available. But I'm going to tell you guys the cheat code of how to do this is just have your patient download it, and there's freemium features that allow them to do the free gait analysis. So let them do that, have them download it and use that information for yourself so that you can make it part of it there. We will always have at least one free gait analysis. We're probably going to allow 2 a month or so just to allow people the chance to reassess. So you can do multiple gait analysis right in the app. So that's going to be a free feature of it there. So if you're looking to do it that way, the paid version of the 2D AI where you can look at all your reports and get a little bit more detail and those things, that's only going to be available for our 3D users. But there's a workaround for this that gets the data that you need, just not as conveniently there. So you just have the athletes down that. So you can actually go to rundna.ai, or if you sign up for our newsletters or things like that, we'll announce all that stuff as well. And if you want to learn more, we did create a code, the Jackson Clinics, July, TJC, July will give you 20% off courses. If you're not confident working with runners and doing these cues, I'd highly recommend those. That's a great one. And then if you want to do more education with us, we've got a free CEU on Thursday at 8 Eastern. So I will allow you guys a chance to look at that. And then I'd invite questions and would love to just open it up to the group to say, hey, what tools are you using? What do you see? What's your comfort level? We'd love any feedback about, why are you comfortable or not comfortable doing these things? And what can we really do to support you? Or what questions do you have about what we talked about here tonight? So go ahead and put those in the chat, and we got a couple minutes for questions here.
And that was a great job, as always, Doug. As those questions start coming in, also feel free to ask questions about specific runners or cases that are stressing you out. You got one of the best running minds in the world. in front of you for at least the next 10 minutes. And while they do that, I do also want to, while they formulate their questions, start it off just by saying, having worked with a number of clinicians now who have really dove into the running world, it really is a multi-level problem to solve often. Number one is making sure you have the right data. Number two is once you get that accurate data, what do you do with it? And number three, as you said, is how can you be versatile enough to reach and affect that runner, either through mobility or stability or, gait retraining and giving the right cues. And it really is complicated. And knowing the depth and breadth of information can be challenging as well. And so there's another piece about that from having read about the app and talked to you a little bit about it, that's I found very interesting, is those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of research studies that you have spent all of your time reading and analyzing. That data is really being pulled into the coaching element of the app. Am I characterizing that correctly?
Yes, yeah. One thing, I didn't put this in here, but I just kind of like a warning to people as well. Like, people can put just basically a skin on ChatGPT and get really generic advice. And I don't know if you've seen these articles, but there's tons of articles out there about, I used ChatGPT to train for a marathon and I got horribly injured. Like, there's a lot of those out there. So what we were able to do is really look at, we have analyzed thousands of runners, right? And we've shown results with the military, we've shown results with pro runners, first-time runners. And we were able to look at all that data and create a very formulaic way to create custom training programs built on how people move, because that really does matter. And then from that information, then we can start to answer some of the questions. But it's not AI creating a training program from them. It's AI looking at all the factors that contribute to that and making small little adjustments here and there for programs that have proven to get people results, but individualizing it in a way like no two runners getting on the app are probably going to have the exact same plan. Each plan is going to be unique to them about what they're looking to accomplish, what their unique characteristics are, what their movement capabilities are. And I know a lot of people kind of appreciate that too, because there's a lot of people that work with runners or want to work with athletes, and they don't necessarily understand the training aspect of it too. So it's a good way to get training advice for your clients without having to know exactly what to do, because it'll do that kind of for you.
Yeah, and there was a slide a bit earlier that you breezed over, mostly, I think, to avoid overwhelming those who are watching and watching the recording, certainly here in the future as well. And it really showed the complexity of that entire case. The movement analysis is absolutely one important piece of it.
Yes.
And the movement retraining is an important piece. But there's the entire, exactly, all the other elements of the system. And again, that's something that I think, there's levels of courses you can go through, and there's training, and there's just being a runner, and there's, understanding the culture and the community and, the other factors. But there's also a lot of value in just having someone who knows this really, really, really well,
Yes.
who's turned this into a tool that actually works. And it's not just a, like you said, like an AI hallucinating, tool that's not as trustworthy.
Yes. I like any AI out there is only as valuable as the context that it's given. And I think that's important to remember too, of putting quality context in, but also what context you don't include and what should it look at and what is a factor and what's not. Because if you tell it a certain factor, like, it's going to be confirmatory a lot of times and be like, oh yeah, we really need to consider this. It's not going to be able to get out there with the clinical judgment and say, here's what we need to do. So that's where a lot of the guardrails have been set of saving the hundreds of articles written or read, and how that comes in and what the factors are, and understanding and putting it all together. Like, we have a saying, we call it our FIT method, right? So find your formula, individualize your training, and track your progress. But finding the formula is what's on this slide right here. what are your movement capabilities? What's your environmental situation? What's your training load? What's your running form like? All of those things create a formula that if it's not always going to be perfect, but you have to balance the equation out. Like I'm a math guy, right? Like, you remember I have to balance equations on either side. That's what you really need to do with runners and athletes in general is figure out, hey, this one isn't where I want it to be. So I need to strengthen this area in order to make that happen. Or they're having reduced movement capabilities. I need to reduce training load in order to accommodate for that. Or their running form gotten much better. The training load can go up now because I'm balancing that equation out. So it's finding that formula for every individual trainer, every individual athlete is really what you're looking to do.
And as the reason, of course, that you breezed over it initially was that can feel overwhelming, right? Especially early on, as you look at it and like, well, I'm not a running expert yet, or I'm not a baseball expert yet, or to go so deep into each one of those can be really, really challenging. And I think that's part of the value of AI, as
Mm-hmm.
long as it's from a reliable source, as long as it really has that nuance built in. And that has been at least my challenge as I've been looking at all these other tools out there in the world is how do I know that I'm getting good data? At some point
Yes.
I'm just relying on the reliability of it, but I don't actually know.
Rolling dice. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the quality matters. And that's why when we built an AI app, it was like AI enhanced, not created. It's all based off of everything we've done. It's our tens of thousands of files. It's everything like that. And because that really does matter. So
It does.
as you're evaluating tools, look at who's making it. Is it a software engineer that just figured out how to put Google Media Pipe on something, or are there results behind it?
Yeah. Yeah, a whole new level of scrutiny required as a consumer, which makes it a bit more challenging. But for those who are trying to break into this world, having resources like you in the running space and hopefully others in other spaces will help. So, as always, Doug, an incredible talk. Thank you. I hope that all who have watched this have gotten a lot out of it. Those who are watching the recording, the QR code should still work. Be sure to spread the word and share it with all those in your professional network who are interested in working with runners. Doug, thank you for taking the time on a Tuesday evening. Sounds like you're doing it again on a Thursday evening, so you're a glutton for punishment. In love with sharing this word with the rest of the PT world. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great night and stay tuned for the next Residency Hot Topics coming soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.